If you're new to this channel or to the idea of FDM printed miniatures, you might be expecting models like this. Full of artifacts, lacking detail and hard to paint. And yes, this is where my FDM journey began, but now I know just how much better we can do, and how much better FDM miniatures can be. Over the course of this channel's lifetime, my hobby of using FDM machines to 3D print miniatures has evolved drastically. I started out by trying to squeeze as much detail as I possibly could out of a completely stock entry-level printer, to eventually swapping nozzles, changing slicers, and even getting hands-on with some other printers. And today we're going to look back over that entire journey so far, from my turning points, pivotal moments, and key takeaways, all while looking at some models. From miniatures that I printed long before this channel existed, to a few that have appeared on video, and even some that I printed in my own time, as I was honing in my various printer settings, many of which haven't yet appeared on camera. So, whether you're a brand new viewer or a long-time watcher, there's going to be something here for everyone. I'm Jacob from Painted for Combat, and let's get into it. With incredible new FDM machines being released seemingly left, right, and centre at the moment, could this allow people to ditch the risks of resin? Or for people like myself, where resin printing simply isn't an option, could it open up the hobby to more people? Whether you're like me, living in a small apartment with limited ventilation where resin isn't a safe or viable option, maybe you don't have the space for all the extra little things that you need for resin printing. Or perhaps you just don't want harmful chemicals lying around. With an FDM machine, as long as you're using a safer material like PLA, most of those concerns aren't a problem. And if you're worried about the unknowns and the what-ifs, particulates and anything like that, sitting an FDM machine next to an open window or a simple HEPA filter air purifier will eliminate almost all of those issues. So then, what's the catch? To put it simply, FDM printing is not designed with miniatures in mind. Where modern resin printers can print as thin as 10 microns, or 0.01 millimeters, the lowest most FDM machines can reach is anywhere between 40 to 80 microns. And while a resin printer can print as detailed as their UV screen allows, an FDM machine is limited by the size of its nozzle, which can only be made so small before pushing plastic becomes tricky. Of course, a 12K screen is going to yield better results than a 0.2mm nozzle. And yet, unless you're some competition painter, I ask you, does that really matter? Is the difference between a great resin mini and a good FDM miniature really going to ruin your tabletop gaming experience? Or, as I mentioned before, if you simply can't resin print, wouldn't you rather be able to print decent minis than no minis at all? That was my mindset when starting this channel, and delving into the weeds on printing FDM miniatures. I love playing D&D with my friends, and I fell equally in love with the miniatures side of the hobby. Sure, I have a bunch of plastic model kits, but I don't have every mini that I might need to play every game or tell every story I want to tell. Sometimes I just want to print a specific model, to have a specific miniature, and with resin not being an option, I had to make FDM work. My journey started with a stock standard Elegoo Neptune 3 Pro, a printer that I love and still use to print miniatures to this day. I started with the included 0.4mm nozzle, and to my surprise, after some trial and error, I was able to print some rudimentary miniatures. I shared my experiences, my thoughts, and my approach, and it didn't take long for people to share theirs. Your insights, your tips, your opinions, all of which were invaluable in my furthering of this hobby. But before we get into that, I wanted to mention that this channel is supported by you, the viewers and the community, and even more so by the Painted for Combat Patreon supporters. For just a couple of bucks, you can jump into the Painted for Combat community Discord, share your paint jobs, talk about the tabletop hobby, or get help with your 3D printing projects. And over on that Discord, you can find the downloads to all of my various printer profiles that you see used here on the channel. Or, if you want some fun goodies to keep your FDM printer busy, there are some awesome STLs available as well. A welcome bundle filled with great files from painting handles to miniature bases and 5e compatible condition hangers, as well as monthly sculpted bases, designed to print on FDM machines with no supports required, and sculpted in a way to eliminate as many layer lines as possible, such as this month's release, the City Streets Bases Pack. Classic stone paved street bases ready to print on FDM machines. And setting agnostic, great for a war-torn sci-fi city or a bustling fantasy metropolis. Links in the description to the Painted for Combat Patreon if any of that sounds of interest to you. And I wanted to give a special thank you to the Painted for Display tier patrons, whose support means so much to the channel. And as our newest member to this tier, we have a friend of the channel. Yes, that's 3D printed, otherwise known as Warhammer 3D Resin. Thank you so much for your support. Firstly, you all recommended me swap to Orca Slicer. Not only was it a nicer user experience, but it was possibly, unintentionally, much better suited for miniatures. The support generation within Orca is unmatched by any other slicer I have used for small intricate models. Other programs have similar settings, but the way Orca Slicer generates those supports is key in getting good results on small models. Once you know how to use the supports and paint them in, they don't wrap around the miniature as much as similar programs, encasing them in material, making it impossible to remove supports without snapping small parts surrounded by plastic. Plus, the ability to control the strength of supports to ensure they can be sturdy even on a delicate model, and with a clean interface generation that means you can actually remove them after the print. But the most important change I made was the swap to a 0.2mm nozzle. Even if your layer heights don't change, swapping to a 0.2 will increase the fidelity of a miniature so much. The best way to describe this change? Think of a 0.4mm nozzle as a marker, meticulously drawing the outline for each and every layer of your model. But a marker is sometimes too thick to draw small details, and some things have to be missed or smoothed out. And now, think of a 0.2mm nozzle doing the exact same thing, but with a ballpoint pen. Suddenly, small details, like those on miniatures, eyes, mouths, fabrics, or fingers, can be drawn with a much more detailed outline. And that's exactly what happens. The swap to a 0.2mm nozzle allows for more of that detail to be captured. Again, it pales in comparison to Resin, where an 8 or 12K screen can capture every pixel, but when you're standing a few feet from the gaming table, seeing a model moving around a map from a distance, you will definitely notice the difference between a 0.4 and a 0.2 nozzle print. But oftentimes, you won't be able to tell the difference between a 0.2 FDM Mini and a Resin printed model. But even if you're willing to look past the slight lack in detail, I'm not going to pretend that FDM is all sunshine and rainbows. There's more to consider than just the quality of the prints. The user experience between technologies is quite different, and FDM comes with its own hiccups that take some getting used to. When it comes to the issues of FDM printing, there are two main things I want to cover. The first is print times, and the second is blemishes. Everything from layer lines to stringing. Print times, and the way that they stack up, is one of FDM's biggest differences to resin printing. While resin print times only increased by height, FDM print times increased by volume. Resin printers use a screen, with an image or a cutout of each layer to create that layer all at once. But as we mentioned before, FDM machines have to draw and outline each part of your model. And let's say that you have 3 or 4 models in one print, it has to do those one at a time. So yes, while in Resin a single mini might take 2 hours to print, you could print 20 of them and it still takes 2 hours, if you can fit them all on a single build plate. But with FDM, 20 copies of a 2-hour print is 40 hours, no matter how you look at it. For me, this isn't a huge issue. Even with the inflated print times, I still tend to print more models than I can actually paint in the same time frame, so I don't mind it taking a bit longer. And this seems to be a pretty common consensus from what I've seen in the comments. And then there is the matter of blemishes in FDM prints. Layer lines are less of an issue with many modern printers if you know how to angle a print to get the best results. So unless you're looking at 4K footage of a model, or holding it right to your face, a 0.2 nozzle and a nice thin layer height eliminates most of those unsightly lines. Where the defects really start coming into play are with the nature of molten plastic. Stringing or blobs created on a print can be a sore point for clean miniatures. And while many manufacturers are starting to dial in settings for their materials and ship them with their softwares, stringing can still be a problem if you don't go through filament fast. Most FDM materials can be damaged or degrade simply by leaving them out in a humid room. Yes, there are ways around this if you're willing to buy more equipment, but for me, the best way to avoid these issues is to find a material I like, stick with it, and try not to let rolls hang around half-used for too long. The other thing that you'll run into, and much more often, is support scarring, something that is much harder to prevent or avoid, the blemishes left behind by the printing process itself. You will see similar things in Resin, where supports have disconnected from minis. In FDM this is more pronounced. Anywhere you have a shallow angled overhang, or a part that needs supporting mid-air, a less than perfect few layers is almost unavoidable. Yes, this can be minimized by orienting your prints to need less supports, or to hide these unsightly areas on the connections or backs of models, but that's not always possible. And whether you decide to clean those areas with sandpaper and hobby tools, or leave them as they are, there can and will be missing or muddied details in those areas. But again, I ask you, is that really going to subtract from your tabletop hobby? If your hobby is primarily the painting side of things, the answer might be yes. But if you're just wanting to push some plastic around the table, roll some dice, have some laughs, tell some stories, it probably won't. And having those models on the table, even if they're not perfect, will be way better than if you didn't, if you weren't able to share those moments with the people at your table. So leave your thoughts down below. Would you ever consider swapping from Resin to FDM? And if you have, what has your experience been so far? If you had maybe wanted to get into 3D printing miniatures and had found that Resin wasn't a viable option for you, are you now perhaps considering an FDM machine as a way to enter the hobby? I want to hear all your thoughts and all the stories of your 3D printed miniatures journey, so please consider leaving a comment down below. Don't forget to check out the Patreon if you want to jump into the Discord or check out those awesome STLs. Like if you liked, and subscribe to keep me popping up on your YouTube homepage from time to time, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.